And James Golding-Graham, who is EEH's Decarbonisation and Innovation Manager. They're going to talk about the work they're doing to create various new tools to support local authority partners. James, what's that all about?
Okay, thank you very much. We've been instructed to keep it short and sweet, so let's crack on. I'm James Golding-Graham. I work for England's Economic Heartland, looking after the innovation and decarbonisation work streams. I'm going to talk a little bit today about what we're actually doing to provide new and interesting tools to our local authority partners. Hopefully by now you've got a pretty good idea of where EEH sit in the ecosystem, so just looking about how we can support delivery and moving things forward. So I'm going to talk about 4 of the big projects that we've got underway at the moment. I'll talk first about our evidence base and the enabling freight for net zero, and then go into a little bit more detail about the tools we're developing that are supporting LTP policy development, and indeed looking at EV charge point planning across the region. So starting from the top, the evidence-based refresh. Many of you will be aware that we've been providing an evidence base for our local authority partners since about 2018. It's a nice centralized repository that brings together lots of different data sets. We've got about 45 in there, and I think Naomi was asked the question earlier on about where we're getting our evidence from. We pull this in. These are mostly publicly available data sets, so it's making those big national scale data sets relevant and putting them into context for our region. One of the central data sets we have in there is looking at where growth is occurring. So we do an annual collection of local plan data. So we come out to all of our local development agencies and we map out where the housing growth is going and where the economic opportunities are coming along on the ground. And again, we hold that in this central repository so we can really understand what our transport network needs to do to respond to that growth. At the moment, we're looking at how we can improve that. What else can we bring to the table? So we've been engaging lots with our local authorities over the last month or so and looking at how that's been used historically. We're looking at bringing some OD data, so some mobile network data to the table there so our local authorities can really understand in a much more granular way about how people are interacting with different bits of infrastructure and different places in and around the region. We're looking at bringing some additional data to that looks at active travel. Active travel, as those of you who are involved in it will know, is really difficult data to access. We're looking at how we can understand how long it takes to access different bits of our infrastructure. I know lots of interesting work's being done in and around mobility hubs, which I think Suzanne's going to talk about in a little while. So understanding what those mobility hubs can do in terms of serving our population better to enable better choices. So I'm moving on to the enabling road freight net zero. I'm not going to go into too much detail about this because I don't want to steal the thunder of some colleagues from Atkins who are going to be talking about that in a little while, but it's a really important piece of work, I think, this. Too often freight's overlooked, I think, in transport and transport planning. But this piece of work is looking at how we can work with our partners in the freight and logistics sector to enable that transition to net zero. What can we do to help them on that journey? It's really important for us to address this because I think about a quarter of the emissions at tailpipe that are occurring in EEH come from HGVs and about another 15, 16, 17% are coming from LGVs. So how can we help them make that transition? And I encourage you to go to the session after this one. So moving on, talking a little bit about how we're going to support our local authorities to plan for their LTP. So many of you in the room will be aware that DFT are updating their guidance on local transport plans. We started to think about how to support that quite a long time ago. It was almost before the DFT announced that they were going to update that. We were looking at what was being said in the Transport Decarbonisation Plan, and we noted in there this kind of real emphasis on the role of local authorities about delivering place-based decarbonisation. A big challenge we felt, and this is not just EEH, but the STB community in general, was that there wasn't really a sort of a standardised way to look at the impacts of interventions, policy interventions on carbon. There wasn't a single way to do that. And we were concerned that local authorities would feel the need to go off and develop their own metrics, and we would end up with lots of different mushrooms of interesting innovation and ways of measuring the impacts of those policy interventions. So working across the STB community, we've commissioned some consultancy work to look at what policy does in different place types. So what we're trying to do from an EEH perspective is bring that together with our baselining work. So we've already provided our local authority partners with a top-down baseline. So we've taken that government data that I was talking about earlier on and made that applicable to our local authorities to understand where emissions are occurring on the network, what journey types are driving those emissions. What we're trying to do is to reinforce that evidence base at the moment, that baseline, at the moment, by taking data from each individual local authority's transport model, so we understand even more about those journeys, and then marrying up with that with the different types of policy intervention that a local authority can make. That gives them the opportunity to understand how to best plan and achieve the decarbonisation required to meet those government targets for their places. It gives local authorities the power to understand the best way for their places to get to net zero. What we can do after that as an STB is to re-aggregate that so we can understand what the impacts might be from local transport interventions. It helps the DFT, it helps us to have discussions with the DFT about how we can best enable that to happen. I'm really excited by this one, by the way. We think it's quite a unique way of doing it. We are on track to be able to launch this tool alongside DFT's updated guidance on LTP. We know they're going to come out and talk to our local authority colleagues in consultation about this updated LTP work imminently. So that should be ready sometime towards the end of this financial year. Moving on to the next one. This is looking at how we better plan for electric vehicles. Big policy area, lots of focus on EV at the moment. So we worked with our colleagues over in Transport East on this one, again with a bit of extra funding we had through from DFT to support local authorities in terms of their policy development. It's a tricky area to work in at the moment. There's a lot of advice out there for local authorities, and what we thought we needed to do was to come up with a way that we could provide, again, as close to possible as a single version of the truth for them, so we could start to map out under different scenarios what electric vehicle uptake would look like in different parts of the region. So colleagues from WSP are around today. They were deeply involved with developing this tool. We're now rolling out. And what they did is they looked at different persona types. They looked at accessibility to different alternative modes of transport, so we can start to build a realistic picture of where EV uptake is going to happen. And from that, we can start to understand where the infrastructure needs to go. It's going to be an enormous challenge getting the infrastructure in the ground to make this happen. We know that, again, going back to the last slide, we think that governments are going to start asking local authorities to it's going to be an instruction for them to develop their own approach to delivering EV infrastructure. So we're in the process of working out how we can host that tool and giving our local authorities access to that tool. And if any of you in the room here today want to come and have a chat with me over on the stand later on, I've got a beta version of this on my laptop. It's a bit slow and clunky, but I'd love to show any of you who are particularly interested in it. For me, the most important output of that is understanding where we think the private sector is going to invest. So where do we think that the public sector is going to have to plug the gaps? And that, again, gives us some clearer idea of the scale of the work that's going to be needed at a local authority level. I think I'm going to cut that a little bit shorter than I would have done, but I'm going to hand over to Suzanne at this point, and I think she's going to talk you through some of the other areas we're working on. Thanks.
Thanks, James. I'm Suzanne Winkles, and along with James, I'm in charge of delivering England's Economic Heartlands work programme. So this morning, I think you all did a poll, and you were all discussing about how you think one of the most important things is actually passenger transport. And funnily enough, that's one of the things that we have got a very big focus on in EEH. We are doing a number of different things to try and support local delivery, our local partners to try and deliver more effective passenger transport across the region. I think one of the questions this morning on Slido was how do we get local authorities talking to each other so we can deliver more effective public transport services that go across borders. And this is one of the key areas that we are working on. So we're looking at all these different areas. So fares and ticketing, one of the things we're doing is we're working with our other SDB partners to look at how ready all our bus operators are in the region to bring in integrated ticketing and fare ticket through ticketing to actually allow us to be able to have more effective journeys across the region. We're very keen to promote coach travel, interconnectivity of journeys. We've got quite a number of smaller unitary authorities where a lot of transport services actually end and originate outside of their local authority area. We also want to help our colleagues and our partners with how better infrastructure design and road space design and how we can deliver that. We're looking at alternative fuels and supporting those that have received ZEB funding, but we're also trying to look at how we can decarbonise rural fleets and things like that, things that haven't been looked at before. We're also doing work on looking at to present a stronger case for buses. And I said previously we are quite interested in coaches and the cross-connectivity of coaches. We've already got coaches that do use some of the motorway network and how we can build on this to import that into other parts of the region. And we're also, one of the key things we're doing is establishing the bus forum. So that allows all our local authority partners to actually talk to each other, try and get consistency of services. We're looking at infrastructure to make sure that if you get on a coach or a bus and one part of that is an interconnected route, that you get the same level of bus stop facilities, the same level of services in terms of Wi-Fi on board, that kind of thing, across the whole network. So that we actually work as a network across the region and not just looking at services within a specific local authority area. We're also taking that a next step and looking at mobility hubs. So this is a key